And there's nobody in this room older than the preschoolers that would probably that would believe that a mummy can walk. You either have to be a small child or a horror story freak to buy that one. But in this game, you try anything. I did. Try getting out of bed tonight with your knees held together. You're going to find out that it doesn't work. A mummy can't sit up, he can't stand up, and he can't walk. But Lazarus did all those things. The only possible answer is that he must have been able to shuffle one foot in front of the other. He could only have been buried according to the manner and the custom of the Jews, in a sheet. We just never looked it up before. And when you get down to the bottom line, what difference does it make? Unless, of course, you happen to be trying to witness to a Jew in Jerusalem, and you tell them that Jesus was Jewish, and they buried him like an Egyptian. You know what happens? You get laughed at. I wonder how many Jews we've turned off over the centuries because we were too lazy to do our homework. That too says something, but I don't like it, even a tiny little bit. Truth is the name of the game. The two old men rolled a stone across the face of the tomb. The Greek term, sportomegapetra, literally translated a very, 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 very great stone. Josh McDowell says a better translation is, hey, wow, man, get a load of that rock. That's not a bad translation either. But the Greek seems to indicate a stone weighing in excess of 1.5 tons. And it would be perfectly easy for two old men to do it, because Jewish burial tombs are nothing but caves, or holes dug into the side of a hill. A large stone will be placed above the entrance. If it's a wealthy tomb like the Garden Tomb, there might be something like a millstone rolling in a deep slot or a track. More often than not, it's just a big boulder. After the body's been interred, the men in the burial party put their back against it and start it rolling. Gravity drops it into place. But to open it would mean that you would have to roll at least 1.5 tons uphill with no power equipment. Those girls had an awfully good question on Sunday morning. There was absolutely nothing rhetorical about it. They meant it. Who's going to roll the stone away? It would have taken every man they knew in Jerusalem pushing together to do the job. The Codex Bezae may be the oldest piece of manuscript still in existence. It's in the Cambridge Library in England. It goes back to the first half of the 2nd century. The copier is obviously copying from a 1st century manuscript. In a gloss, that's a note in the margin that you can never copy off into the text. He says that the stone was of a size that 20 men pushing together could not have moved. There was no pebble. The girls had a good question. But a better question might have been, what were they doing there? If those good Jewish girls had actually been there on Friday night and they watched Jesus being buried, I think they helped. Why did they go home, waste their high holiday, their time, their money, purchasing more spices and ointments, preparing them, and now they're coming back to bury Jesus all over again? Hey, seriously, how many times do you bury a man in 3 days? It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It's contradictory. Unless possibly they had done on Friday night what I've done, and so has every one of you at some point. So there's no way we can finish this job tonight. We'll do what we can tonight and finish it in the morning. Or in this case, let's do what we have to preserve his body and get out of here while our heads are still on our shoulders. If we're still alive, we'll be back on Sunday. The Encyclopedia Judaica, printed in Jerusalem, 1972 edition, a good encyclopedia, the same thing as the Britannica or the Americana, under the heading of burial, says it's obvious only to the Jews. It's obvious from the account of the burial of Jesus of Nazareth that there was no time on Friday night in which to bury him according to the requirements of the law. The burial party apparently did only as much as they had to do to protect the body. They intended to give him a legal burial on Sunday. The Jews saw it. Very few, if any, Christians ever bothered to look. At this point, there's a gap in the historical record of the crucifixion. I never saw it before. I never heard anyone preach it. That 3 out of 4 writers don't tell us what happened for the next 3 days. They end the story on Friday night with 2 old men rolling a big boulder. They drop the story and they don't pick it up again until Sunday, when the women are wondering how they're going to get past it. In between, there's nothing. Probably they didn't know. No one but Matthew gives us any indication at all of what could have happened. And nobody in the world but Matt could have written the 28th chapter of his book, because he turned out to have been a thief. He was a traitor. He was a man who had loved money more than he loved anything else in the world, including his own life. Matthew had been a tax collector. Well, over the years, back home, I've called tax collectors worse names than that, and I probably will again next week. But this one, it earned it. Israel then, and it usually was, a conquered nation. This time it was Rome that was grinding him under its heel. And Caesar was demanding his money. His method of collecting taxes? Supreme simplicity. He put the job out for bid. Matthew was a first-century Jew who had bid for the privilege of collecting the enemy's taxes from his own people. He'd be like one of you men bidding for the privilege of collecting Russia's taxes in Cleveland. Do you know how he'd be loved? When he walked down the street, every Jew deliberately turned their back to him, not permitting him to see their face. If they were forced to look at him, they spit in his face. That, too, was the custom. He had absolutely no friends except the other tax collectors and the posses, until one day a carpenter walked by. He said, "Hey, Matt, how would you like to follow me?" He got up from his table, walked away, never went back, and if we can believe tradition, it's only tradition, we can't prove it. He died an awfully horrible death in a place that we call Iran. But at that moment of time, of all those men walking with Jesus, not one of them but Matthew would have talked to a dog or a pig, what they called the Roman legionnaires. Matthew dealt with Romans. Matthew knew Romans by their first names. Romans had been keeping him alive for we don't know how long. You see, we don't really know which tax he was collecting. But regardless of type, it called for a table set up in town, and a Roman legionnaire standing in back of him with a sharp spear, as much to keep him alive as to assist in collecting his taxes. See, a traitor is number one on any patriot's hit list in any conquered nation, and Matthew was a traitor. Suppose it was the personal tax. Caesar might say your tax was 50. Matthew would look you over, decide he could get 100 for the jacket. That was your tax. If you wanted to argue, he collected from your estate, right on the spot. He never lost, he got extremely wealthy and extremely hated, but he dealt with Romans. And that gets awfully, awfully heavy when you realize that the 28th chapter of the book of Matthew is the only one in the entire Bible that could have been dictated by a Roman legionnaire. Sure, Matthew wrote it, but the information in that chapter could never have been given to him by anybody in the world but a Roman soldier, because there was a Roman guard in the tomb of Jesus. For this, I wound up in the Library of Congress. I discovered that the book we needed was awfully difficult to get in this country. It's almost classified. The Military Institutions of the Roman Legion, written in the year 390 by a character named Flavius Frigidius Renatus. Imagine doing that to a poor innocent baby. Somebody must have hated that baby before he was born. He was a Roman military historian. By the year 390, the Legion had begun to fall apart. Caesar wanted to restore it to what it had been in the first century. Flavius was telling him how. He described the Roman Guard at the time of Christ. It was not 2 or 3 sleepy-eyed characters the way the painters usually show it, leaning on a stick. It was a fixed fighting unit, very similar to today's Green Beret or Navy SEALs. That's why the book's so difficult to get in this country. Our own military would just as soon you didn't read it. We discovered that our own Green Beret is being trained by the principals in that book. That's how rough they were. Napoleon said they never went anywhere without a copy of that book in his pocket. Apparently, the only person who should have read it and didn't was Caesar. The Legion was destroyed. But a Roman Guard consisted of anywhere from 4 to 20 men, usually 16, superbly trained with a spear, a short sword, a dagger. Each man carried 5 javelins in the curve of his shield. Each man carried a sling, his primary weapon, with which he was trained to make one swing around his head and heave a 1-pound rock 70 feet and get a 12 to 14-inch post every single time at 70 feet. These jokers were lethal. If you can believe Flavius, they could pick off the head, stomach, or feet at will at 70 feet. They fought back to back in a geometrical pattern, each man responsible for only 6 square feet of space and his buddy's back. When one man moved, they all moved. A living fighting tank. As far as I could find out, they never lost a fight. They were considered invincible in the first century. This is what was guarding the tomb of Jesus. To make it better, Polybius describes them about 2 centuries before Christ. He says that if the guard was assigned to sentry duty and 1 man out of 16 fell asleep, all 16 would be executed because they had failed their mission. Fantastic. But that meant that if you were on a guard and you looked sleepy, you had 15 buddies whose lives depended on you staying awake. They'd have propped you up on the points of 15 spears if they had to. This was not American justice. The trial would be convened within the hour by the tribunes of the Legion. If you were found guilty, Polybius said you'd always be found guilty. That's predestination. Your own tribune touched you on the shoulder with a vine staff, the signal for the entire battalion to beat you into hamburger with clubs and stones. Your best friend had to take a swing at you. Then a trumpet would be blown for every Roman executed to let the whole world know, if this is the way we handle ours, what do we do to you?